Thank you. It's good to be here, Fred. It's, Mary, it's nice to be with you as well. Just having fun with you, Don. No, no, it really is a great joy to be with you guys, and I'm grateful. By definition, you've come to a dinner to celebrate the 125th year of really the foremost Jewish missions agency on the planet, right? So you already have some sense of why this is important. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the moment that we're in from my angle, and to try to underscore why I believe that what Mitch and his team are doing, Mitch and Zahava even, especially, this is so important. And you should know right up front my motive. They are trying to raise $1.125 million this year, above and beyond what the normal income is to Chosen People Ministries. Why? Because this is a strategic moment. Not just because it's the 125th year, but because something is going on in the world of Jewish evangelism that is unlike any other moment in human history. And I have no hesitation or reluctance to stand with them or to ask you to invest significantly. So that's where I'm headed. If you're in the wrong room, I hope you enjoyed the chicken, but that's where I'm going. Okay? It won't be a hard sell. I'm just going to tell you why I think it's so important and why I believe you should invest heavily. And then it's up to you and Jesus, okay? So that's, that you won't get any, there won't be any headlocks or anything. It's just, but that I wanted you to be I want to be clear where we're going, okay? Now, you have to understand, so I'm Jewish on my father's side and Gentile on my mom's side, okay? When my father came to faith in Jesus as Messiah in 1973, he thought he was the first Jew since the Apostle Paul who believed this. Okay, he had never met a Jewish person ever who believed that Jesus is the Messiah. Never met one, never heard of one. And in 1973, we believe there weren't that many. Best research we have is that in 1973, or thereabouts, certainly when I was born in 67, we believe there were fewer than 2,000 Jewish people on the entire planet Earth that believe this theological truth, that Jesus of Nazareth is in fact the Messiah that was sent for us and through us to the rest of the world. Fewer than 2,000 on the entire planet Earth in 1967. So maybe there were a few more in 73, but I got to tell you, there weren't that many, and my father thought he was one of the first ones. He thought he was the first one. Now, almost every Jewish person who came to faith during that time has that testimony. I'm just glad I got to use that joke first tonight because every single person up here could say it. Okay? But I want to tell you something that's fascinating. So I came to faith through the fact that my mother had come to faith first, by the way, a Gentile who was agnostic when she met and married my father. Otherwise, she wouldn't have met and married. Well, she might have met him, but she wouldn't have married him. She'd been raised in the Methodist Church. She'd never heard the gospel. And her family comes from if you go several generations back, there were circuit riding, gospel preaching Methodist missionaries in her heritage. But by the time she was born and raised, she was in a church, a little Methodist church in upstate New York that didn't believe in Jesus. I mean, they talked about him, but they didn't share the gospel. They didn't say you had to be born again or why that was so wonderful. So she was an agnostic by 1964 when she met my father. My father was raised in an Orthodox Jewish home, first generation American. His parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents had been Orthodox Jews in Minsk, Russia, Belarus, White Russia. But during the pogroms of the early 1900s, there had been such violence and such horror done to the Jewish people that you really had two options at that point as an Orthodox Jew in anti-Semitic, fascist, czarist Russia. You could fiddle on the roof, or you could get out. So obviously many people were not able to get out, but somehow my family, by God's grace, hid in a hay wagon that was crossing over a border. Tsarist soldiers took their swords and plunged them into the hay just to see if anyone was in there. By God's grace, no one was injured. None of the children, of which there were many, none of them sneezed. None of them said, "Are we there yet? I got to go to the bathroom." They were quiet, and they got out. Now, having gotten out of anti-Semitic, fascist, Tsarist Russia, they could have settled in Poland or Germany or Austria or anywhere in Central or Eastern Europe where many Jews thought, okay, now we're safe. But for some reason, they kept pushing across the continent of Europe. They got on a steamship. They made it to the New World. They made it to the United States. And like any good Jewish family, they set up shop in Brooklyn, which is where my father and his brother were born and raised. Okay? Now, he was not raised in an Orthodox Jewish family that was loving or kind. He wasn't loving or kind either to them. It was a very, very sad and painful and angry home. My father says his first language was cursing, his second language was Yiddish, and his third language was English. That's his testimony. So when he got to be 18 years old, after growing up in an Orthodox Jewish home, and there were many Orthodox Jewish homes that were loving, lost but loving. So I just want to be clear, but his wasn't. Okay, I'm just giving you his story, and he really thought by the time of 18, he didn't want to have anything to do with Orthodox Judaism, his parents, Brooklyn, the synagogue, Bupkis. So he decided to leave and never come back to Brooklyn. So he wanted to go and move to the Promised Land, La Jolla, California. He certainly wasn't moving to Israel because that was more Jewish people, and he considered that the source of the problem. That was his perception. California seemed like dreamy and Gentileville. Like it just seemed like, oh, that's the land where everything is good, and it's far away from Brooklyn. And so this was his life. So he became an architect out here. He got his first job as an architect back in Syracuse, New York, and moves into an apartment complex where he, as an agnostic Orthodox Jew, met my mother at a Christmas party. Okay, so anyway, they get married in 65, they have me in 67, they get lost in a snowstorm in 68, they move to a little town where they had gotten lost that they thought was fun, and that's where they raised me and eventually my sisters. And it's there in just outside the city of Rochester that they heard the gospel clearly, and my mother came to faith first, her heart being quickened. This is what we've been looking for. This is the truth. And my father, after going through after joining a small group Bible study with my mom, working their way through the gospel according to Luke, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, came to faith. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Jesus is actually the Messiah. Who knew? Right? And he gave his life to the Lord. And this was a huge spiritual revolution in our family. Now, it's really through their transformation that I came to faith in Jesus. It's through watching them change. My father had a volcanic temper. My mother was nearly paralyzed with phobias and fears and nearly paralyzed. Couldn't make it through the day often. But the Holy Spirit was working on them, and I could see it happening. I was a child. I was 6 years old. But over those next few years, I could see them changing. So I don't want to focus so much on how I came to faith, because it was really what God did as a miracle in my parents, he did in me. But it was a lot easier as a second-generation believer. I didn't have to deal with the resistance or the hostility or the anger of my family. Right? I had the benefit of watching Jesus transform this couple, a couple whose marriage was headed to blow up and didn't because of Jesus. And so that made it a lot easier for me to come to faith. Wonderful. Now, the challenge was I didn't know I was Jewish. You're like, you didn't know you were Jewish? Your name is Joel Rosenberg. What are you talking about? You didn't know you were Jewish. I didn't know I was Jewish till the 5th grade. You're like, the 5th grade? You must have been the dumbest kid in the class. Well, I'm sure that I was, but how could you have not known you were Jewish? I mean, seriously? You're growing up in New York State? You don't know? I'm just telling you, I didn't know. Why didn't I know? Because my parents didn't tell me. Why didn't they tell you? I think my father didn't want to talk about being Jewish. It was too painful. He didn't have warm, cozy, friendly memories of this. This wasn't, he wasn't singing. We weren't going to see Fiddler on the Roof every year. We weren't singing. There was nothing warm and cozy about his history. So therefore, we didn't talk about it. Therefore, I didn't know. You're like, well, how did you find out? Well, my father was asked to teach a 6th grade Sunday school class in our little, tiny evangelical church in this town of Fairport, New York. One of the elders came up to him and said, "Len, you're Jewish, right?" Now, if a Gentile, if you're a Jew from Brooklyn, and a Gentile asks you if you're Jewish, you're sort of, why do you want to know? Well, they said, because that means you know the Old Testament, right? Again, every Gentile believer thinks that Jews have this tremendous understanding of the Hebrew Scriptures, and mostly we don't, right? So he said, "Why do you ask?" He said, "Well, because we have a Sunday school class for 6th graders. We need a teacher, and it's basically Old Testament stories. And we thought maybe you'd enjoy teaching that." And he thought, "Well, I probably know those stories better than the kids. Sure, okay, sure." Now, there was a little girl in this class. There was only 6 or 7 kids in the class, but there was a little girl a Gentile family, but a family that loved Jewish people. And there are some Gentiles who love Jewish people a little too much. They're a little, woo, okay, just take some have decaf, it's all good. We love them too, God loves them, but just, okay, easy there, just with all respect. But this was a healthy Jewish loving Gentile family, very good. But their little girl, 6th grade, was like, "Mr. Rosenberg, that name's Jewish, right?" I mean, she knew. He says, "Yes, it's Jewish." And because she was a little girl and he didn't, why do you want to know? He kind of went with it. "Well, did you celebrate?" And she would ask him over the weeks ahead that, what about this holiday? Like Hanukkah was coming up. Did you celebrate Hanukkah? "Well, of course, Angie. We celebrate." "Well, what do you do? What did your family do?" So somehow this little girl was able to get things out of him. Now, I'm in 5th grade. I'm not in the class. Okay? So all these holidays are going by. When she gets up to Passover, she says, "Mr. Rosenberg, did you celebrate Passover?" "Well, of course, Angie. We celebrated all of them." "Well, what did you do? How did that work?" He explained it. Now, I think none of the other kids in the class, whom I came to know well, none of them cared. But they would let her just ask her questions, and he would tell her. And anyway, long story short, she said, "Mr. Rosenberg, could we have a Passover Seder in our class?" And he couldn't think quickly enough of why the answer should be no. So to the little girl in the 6th grade class, "Sure, Angie, we'll have a Passover Seder. We'll do it next week." "Okay, great." So we all come home from church, my mom, my sister, and myself, and we're probably having ham. I mean, to be honest. I mean, we were fairly assimilated, right? I mean, we're not, So it's probably ham, scalloped potatoes. I don't really remember, but I'm just saying it's possible, even probable. And so he says, "Listen, next week, I would love it if you would all come to my 6th grade Sunday school class because we're going to have a Passover Seder." And I said, "A what?" The thing you do to celebrate Passover. "I'm not following you." "What's Passover?" He says, "You don't know what Passover is?" I said, "No, that's why I'm asking." What are you talking about? You don't know? No, I don't know what is Passover? Okay, so he explains what Passover is. I said, "Well, what's a Seder?" "You don't know what it is?" I said, "Dad, I don't know what a Seder is. Just tell me." So he explains it. I said, "How would you know how to do that?" He says, "Because I'm Jewish." I said, "You're Jewish? Does that mean I'm Jewish? How did this never come up? I mean, seriously, are you kidding me?" That's how I discovered that I was Jewish. Now, again, 5th grade. So a couple of years later, I'm in 7th grade, and this is junior high school, and this is the junior high youth group. This little girl is now in 8th grade, and she says, "Hey, you're Mr. Rosenberg's son." I said, "Yeah." She says, "You're Jewish." I said, "Apparently." That is so cool. Is it? Why is that so cool? And over the years to come, again, this little tiny group of kids, they thought, this is interesting. And I thought, maybe it is. Maybe it is. Who knew? And over time, as I began to grow in my faith, I began to think, maybe it is cool. I mean, maybe knowing Jesus and being Jewish is not normal, but is good. And so over time, this really did begin to capture me. And I began to think, I think she's right. I think this is a good thing. And so it's interesting to where I've gotten to today. Where God has taken me on this journey is odd. It's unexpected. So when I met my wife, Lynn, at Syracuse University, Lynn's from New Jersey, and Lynn had seen a Christ in the Passover Seder at her little, unfortunately dead Methodist church, but nevertheless, they had, and it was a Jews for Jesus group. I'm allowed to say that here, I think, but anyway, that happens to be what it was. And she got so excited, about the same age as when I was discovering what a Seder was, that she signed up for the newsletter. Now, our family didn't know what Jews for Jesus was, or we'd never heard of Chosen People Ministry. We had no idea, and we were Jewish. My wife-to-be was getting a newsletter and was so fascinated in this. So when she got to Syracuse University, she became a creative writing major and a Jewish studies minor. Well, that was a match made in heaven for a future novelist and Israeli citizen and somebody who loves to share the gospel with Jews and Muslims and others. So the Lord has taken us on this journey, and one of the things that has intrigued us is the doors that has opened to talk to Jewish people about Jesus. Because everything I read, once I started to get interested in this topic and this mission, it was all about how hard it was, and how resistant Jewish people are, and how hostile Jewish people will be once you start bringing up the name of Jesus. That's everything I read, everyone I talked to, that was the consistent story. Except I will just tell you, in my personal case, I have not experienced that. Now, maybe I'm doing it wrong, but I get a lot more blowback on Twitter and Facebook. But in personal conversations, I have been stunned by how open Jewish people are to talking about faith in Jesus. I was on the first novel I wrote was called The Last Jihad. That came out in November of 2002. Some of you may be familiar with that. The first page puts you inside the cockpit of a jet plane that's been hijacked by radical Islamist terrorists coming in on a kamikaze attack mission into an American city. I began writing that almost 9 months before September 11th, 2001. I wasn't trying to predict it. I'm not a clairvoyant. I'm not a psychic. I'm not Miss Cleo. I'm not a prophet. I'm not trying to predict things that will happen. I'm writing about worst-case scenarios that could happen. That happened to be eerily on target, as it were. There were some differences between my book and what really happened on September 11th, but the arc of the story starts with the kamikaze attack by the radical jihadist terror cell and leads to my fictional American president declaring war on Saddam Hussein and removing him from power because of his connection between terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. That's how I was finishing the novel on the morning of September 11th. Well, when the novel released, when The Last Jihad released in November of 2002, nobody had ever heard of me. I was a failed political consultant. You have to understand, for almost 10 years, I helped people lose their elections. Well, you're laughing because it's not your resume, but it didn't seem so funny at the time. So that was difficult, and I didn't. So I realized that's not the job for me, right? And I've got to do something else with my life. But one of the challenges is I'm one of the few Jewish people that was born and raised in America that didn't get the financial gene, okay? I'm not your accountant. I'm not your stockbroker or your hedge fund manager, okay? Nor am I your doctor or your lawyer or your acupuncturist or chiropractor. I didn't get the classic Jewish skill sets. I'm not running a Hollywood movie studio. What was left for me? I make things up for a living. That's the problem. And I mean, that's all that I got. Okay, so these are my loaves and fishes. All right, Lord, so if I don't really know how to do anything else, then writing stories must be the way. Can I write gospel tracts disguised as New York Times best-selling political thrillers? Would you let me do that? That became my mission, right? And that's what The Last Jihad was about. Now, because no one had ever heard of me and because I had no track record, the PR people trying to get me booked on radio and TV for that first novel were having a challenge. Nobody would book me. So they went to an acid rock radio station in my hometown of Rochester, New York, and they pleaded with the popular morning show host, Brother Weeze, would you have this guy on? He's a hometown boy who's written a novel that's kind of eerily close to what's happening. And they sent him an advance copy, and the guy said yes. And he even read the novel before I came on. So the first full day of the tour, he's like, dude, how did you know? I mean, come on, dude. How did you know that someone was going to fly a plane like a missile into an American city? I mean, dude, that's crazy. That's whack. How'd you know? I didn't know, and so I began to explain the research process, the thinking process that led to The Last Jihad. He's like, yeah, but dude, come on. I mean, now you're talking about maybe, your novel leads to a war with Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein. We're in a big national debate right now about whether we should do just that. How'd you know it, dude? How could you? You're the only guy that's written a novel like this. Well, dude, I didn't really know, but he's like, so we keep walking through the story. Then he says, now wait a minute, I got a question. Are you a Heb? I said, I'm sorry? Are you a Heb? Are you a Hebrew? Like in National Hot Dog? I mean, what do you, I honestly never heard the term. Like it's not a good term. Don't use it. But that's what he said. He goes, are you Jewish? He said, I'm Jewish. I said, you're Jewish? Brother Weeze, I thought maybe he was a Jesuit, or I didn't know what he was. I didn't know he was Jewish. I was remembering why I didn't listen to him. But anyway, so he says, yeah, he goes, I'm Jewish, but are you Jewish? I said, well, and I explained my father is, my mother isn't. Okay, all right, but I read the whole novel this weekend. And dude, you got these characters at the end of your book. They're all talking about what, terrorism and death and the afterlife and how do you know you're going to go to heaven? And you got these characters. Some of them are talking about Jesus. What are you, a born again? An evangelical? I mean, he said it like it was the most radioactive, disgusting cocktail of concepts that he'd ever heard of in his life. And I said, well, I am born again, evangelical. Wow, I'm a believer in Jesus. What? Wait a minute, he says. I don't understand. How can you be Jewish and believe in Jesus? I said, well, Mr. Weeze, I'm not sure that we have time to get into it on the program. You've got a commercial coming up, and I've got other shows, a few. But he goes, no, wait a minute. It's one thing to have a novelist that writes fiction that seems to come true. To have a guy like that on my show, that's one thing. But to meet a Jew who believes in Jesus, this I gotta hear, son. So he kept me over the commercial break, and he insisted that I walk him through my parents' testimony and my testimony, and that's how the Last Jihad book tour began. Okay? Over the next 60 days, I was on 160 radio and television programs. Not all of them, but many of them asked me very similar questions, not as colorfully as that. But they asked me about my faith and how I could be a Rosenberg and believe in Jesus. What was that all about? And I had woven these themes into the book. And the novel hit #1 on Amazon. It spent 11 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. And I got to talk about my faith in Jesus with millions of people in just a few short months. And that was how my new life began, my new career, pivoting from being a failed political consultant to a novelist. And what has happened over time is that question, how can you be a Jew and believe in Jesus, has become my favorite question, and it's become the most asked question anywhere I go in the country or the world. I was once invited to the home of the director of Islamic affairs of the kingdom of Morocco. Okay, this man was in charge of 33,000 mosques, and he had read one of my novels. And when he came to Washington once, he invited himself over for dinner, and we had him over for dinner. And he said, then you must come and let me repay you by hosting you in my home in the kingdom. And I said, well, I'd be honored. So I did that and got to his home, and he had this whole lovely meal, and he had high-level officials, all Muslim leaders from the kingdom, and he said a Muslim prayer over the meal, and then we sat down. He said, now I've got a question. Ever since I met you, I've been wanting to ask you. I don't know why I didn't ask you back in Virginia. Your name is Rosenberg, right? Isn't that Jewish? Yes, it is. But clearly you're an evangelical. You're a follower of Jesus. How is that possible? How can you be Jewish and believe in Jesus? And I thought, get out. Are you kidding me? Here in Rabat, the capital of Morocco, the director of 33,000 mosques is asking me to explain how you can be Jewish and believe in Jesus? Oh man, this is fun. This is exciting. I've been asked this all over the world. 4 weeks ago, almost 5 weeks ago, I was having lunch at the White House with a dear friend, happens to be the Vice President of the United States. Now, I know that's name dropping, but I'm saying it anyway because Mike and Karen Pence have been friends of, Lynn and I have been friends of theirs since he was in the House of Representatives, and they were readers of the novels, and they had reached out to us and wanted to meet. Who knew he was going to become the Vice President of the United States? He didn't, we didn't. But now he is, and so every year we have sent them advanced copies of the next novel. When he was governor of Indiana, we did this, and we went out. They invited us to come out and visit them once, and we did that and stayed at the governor's mansion. And I asked Mike, what do you think of the new novel? He said, well, I haven't actually seen it. As it's happening, usually Karen gets it. It comes in the mail. Karen gets it, and I don't see it for a long time. He wasn't complaining, really, but I got the sense that he wasn't so happy with her because he wasn't getting a chance to read it himself. So when he became vice president, the first time I saw him, I brought him his and her copies. I said, listen, you're the second most powerful man on the planet now. You're going to have a lot of pressures on your life, on your marriage. I don't want this to be one of them. Here you go. Well, this is for her. This is for you. We're good to go. So a few weeks ago when I got to the States, just about to launch the tour for the Persian Gamble, I brought him copies, his and her. And we had lunch together, and we talked about what's going on in the Middle East and what's going on in Israel and so forth. And at the end of lunch, he said, have you ever met the president? I said, I have not. He said, follow me. What? So we walked through the West Wing, and the next thing I know, we're walking into the Oval Office. I've never been in the Oval Office in my life. Now I'm walking in. First person I see is Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State. Now, Mike and I have been friends since he was in the House of Representatives. Who knew he'd be the Director of Central Intelligence and now the Secretary of State? And the reason I met him is because his staff invited me because he was a reader of the novels. So I was happy to see Mike. John Bolton was right there. He's been somebody I've known for many years. He's now the National Security Advisor. Now, I don't think that he's a reader of the novels, but I like him anyway. That's what unconditional love is. It's really all about. So I'm in the room with 3 people that I know, and the next thing, the door opens, and President Trump walks into the room. Now, we shake hands. It was an honor to meet him. And he said, hey, let's sit down. Let's chat. And the vice president said, well, I know that we've got to go to this meeting. We're having lunch with the Czech prime minister any moment. I just realized that you had never met Joel, but he's sold 5 million copies of his novels, and he's an influential evangelical. So I just thought you should meet, but we don't really have time. No, we've got plenty of time, no problem. So sit down. Okay. So I sit down. He sits down. The president sits down behind the Resolute desk. I sit down across from him, the vice president to my right, the secretary of state to my left, and the national security advisor pulls up a chair next to Pompeo. Now, I have to admit, I've written a lot of scenes in that room in my books, and I have never been there. But rather than thinking about that at that moment, I'm having this flashback to childhood, the little Sesame Street cartoons that used to sing, one of these things is not like the other. One of these things just doesn't belong. And I'm like, what is happening in this room? My head's spinning on its axis. I'm like, this is crazy. And the president says, well, Joel, it's good to meet you. Tell me a little bit about yourself. So I'm about to say, a few things. And he said, wait. The vice president just called you an evangelical. You're an evangelical? I said, I am. He said, but your name is Joel Rosenberg. He said, isn't that Jewish? I said, yes, it is. He goes, how? I don't understand. How can you be Jewish and be an evangelical? I'm like, get out of here. Come on. I mean, it was like, I don't know if you watched Seinfeld, but I want to be like, Elaine, get out. But I thought, the Secret Service were president. You can't just do that to the president, right? And fortunately, there was a desk between us. But the point is, I was like, are you telling me I'm about to get to talk about what it means to be a Jewish follower of Jesus in the Oval Office with the President of the United States? And that's exactly what happened. God opened that door. Now, other than Muslims, and the only other people that ask me are Jews, right? Christians do not ask me, how is that possible? And I thought that was interesting because I think there's a sense I have that Trump actually sees the world in part through Jewish lenses. His daughter, Ivanka, converted to Orthodox Judaism. He loves Ivanka, he loves Jared, clearly, and he's got Orthodox Jewish grandchildren. So as you pray for the president, for his salvation, for his family, for the rest, remember that he's looking at the world in part through Jewish family lenses. So this was really interesting to talk about. Then he said, okay, all right, so now I understand you're living in Israel. I said, yes, I'm a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. So really? So I said, yeah, don't tell Congresswoman Omar, but I actually have dual loyalties. I actually love both of these countries. So he laughed. And I said, I want to thank you. I don't know how many Israeli citizens who are not, the prime minister or the ambassador get to sit with you and say thank you for being the most pro-Israel president in our history and moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. I happen to live across the street from the embassy. So we had a fun conversation about how he made that decision and so forth, and that was really interesting. Then he said, now just tell me real quickly about, just tell me a little bit more about yourself. I said, well, you have to know that I, Mr. President, was a never Trumper until the Thursday before the election. Now, my friends, how often do you think the term never Trumper is used in the Oval Office these days? Looking into his eyes, I think the answer is not that many. But I explained how I had kind of come through this process, ended up voting for him reluctantly at the end, mainly because my wife said, we've known Mike and Karen Pence for a long time. You're really going to vote against a ticket where someone has read your books and enjoyed them? That's your plan? And he laughed at that. Anyway, he asked me to talk about the Persian gamble, and I did that. And I'll tell you what I told him, and then I'm going to pivot to why this all matters. I gave him the elevator pitch on the Persian gamble. I said, listen, this novel is about what if the Iranian regime takes the $150 billion that President Obama gave them for agreeing to the insane Iran nuclear deal, which, thank God, Mr. President, you scrapped. And this is one of my list of things that you've done right that I'm very grateful for. I'd given him a long list. And I said, but what if the Iranians take that $150 billion and secretly go to North Korea and try to buy a half dozen off-the-shelf, fully operational nuclear warheads? And he says, wow, well, how do you know they're not doing that already? I said, Mr. President, I'm trusting that you and the men in this room are making sure every single day you're working hard to make sure that the Persian gamble never comes true. And we talked about the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship and the threats that we face as Americans, as Christians, as Jews, as others. Now, I say that because God is opening some remarkable doors, and we are dual citizens, and I've got two sons in the Israeli army, one in combat intelligence, the other in special forces. They are having all kinds of opportunities to talk about their faith in Jesus. And it's not like they've got a strategy. People just ask them. One of these things is not like the other. There's very orthodox religious national Zionists, and there are the secular they'll sleep with anyone, drink anything. Like, that's the groups that are in their units. And then there's my boys. And God is opening up all these amazing doors. I am not seeing resistance. I am seeing openness. Everywhere I go, whether they're Israeli government officials or just regular, ordinary Israelis, Jews all over the world, Muslim leaders, doors are opening to meet with Saudi leaders and the king of Jordan and the president of Egypt and so forth. God is opening up all kinds of doors. And as a Jewish follower of Jesus, I'm not seeing the level of resistance that I ought to historically. Why? It's not me. It's the moment. More Jews, more Muslims, but we're going to focus on Jews, are open to the gospel today than at any other time in human history. This is extraordinary. Mitch and I, several years ago, we started talking about, we sensed that that there wasn't a good research project that had assessed how many Jewish believers in Jesus there are in the United States. So we worked on a project, an expensive and a very detailed research project with Lifeway Research from the Southern Baptist organization. And we said, we want to understand how evangelicals view Jewish people, Israel, Palestinians, the peace process, Jewish evangelism. We want to understand a lot of issues. We want to understand how millennial evangelicals differ from their parents and grandparents. So we embarked on this massive benchmark survey of American evangelicals. We did not allow you to describe yourself in the survey as an evangelical. You were asked a series of 4 questions from the National Association of Evangelicals. Is Jesus the only way to heaven? Is the Bible the your highest source of authority, and so forth? There's 4 questions that the NAE say, if you believe in all 4, then we qualify you, we classify you as an evangelical. That's what we did. If you didn't say strongly agree to all 4, then we politely thanked you and hung up on you. But if you said yes to all 4, then we went on with the rest of the survey. We discussed this, and we said, listen, we want to understand all these other things, but let's add in one demographic question. One demographic question. We're going to ask you if you're Hispanic or you're African American or you're Asian or you're white or whatever. We're going to ask you your income and your part of the country that you live in. Those are all classic, standard demographic questions to understand who we're talking to. But we want to know one more thing. One simple question. Do you have a Jewish parent or grandparent or both? That's not, because we think that my theory was that we are not picking up a lot of the accurate number of Jewish believers in Jesus, because if you did a survey and you said, are you a Messianic Jew? Many, myself included when I lived in the States, would not have used that term. I was not part of a Messianic congregation. I was part of an evangelical congregation. So I didn't think of myself as Messianic. That's almost a subculture in American faith, right? So that wasn't me. So I would not have said yes. So you wouldn't have gotten my whole family in a survey. But if you asked another way, if you said, are you a Hindu, are you a Muslim, are you a Jew, are you a Christian, are you agnostic, are you atheist, I would have thought, oh, that's a theological question. I'm going to answer, I'm a Christian. That's the closest way. So you wouldn't have picked me up that way either. So this way was, we already know you're an evangelical. We know what your beliefs are. The question is, do you have an ethnicity that's Jewish? Or do you have a Jewish parent or grandparent? That's a yes or no question. You either do or you don't. What we found was so stunning, we didn't release the study for months because we didn't believe it. What we found was there are 871,000 Jewish evangelicals, Jewish followers of Jesus in the United States alone as of 2017. We're like, get out. There's no way. On the the Chosen People website, just 2 years ago, I don't know if you guys have updated it. I hope you have. But on your website, even a year ago, before the study came out, it said, and I quote, some say there are as many as 300,000 Jewish followers of Jesus worldwide. We think the more conservative number is probably around 200,000, end quote. I was the one going around saying 300,000, but they were distancing themselves from my assessment. But no, it's okay. It's all right, Bob. So, but they were being more conservative. And, they are Chosen People Ministries is the foremost experts on Jewish missions in the world. So that's, if they think maybe the number is closer to 200,000 worldwide, okay, that's, fair enough. This was telling us there was 4 times more just in the United States alone. So we didn't believe it. So we went and we analyzed this, and we talked to a bunch of people. We had other people cross-check these numbers, and statisticians and other pollsters. We looked at and we concluded in the end, oh my gosh, this is accurate. What does that tell us? 871,000 Jewish followers of Jesus in the United States alone? Well, now you have to add, there was a new study done by One for Israel, the Israel College of the Bible, and they found that in 1948, there were only 23 followers of Jesus from a Jewish background in Israel in 1948, when the country was prophetically reborn. 23 Jewish followers of Jesus. Now the study says, as of now, there are 30,000. That's over a 1,000-fold increase. Now, it took 70 years. And in a country of 6.5 million Jewish people, that's not enough. But to go from 23 to 30,000, that's pretty extraordinary. Okay? To go from no congregations to 300 and some congregations, that's pretty extraordinary. And in this country, to go from when I was born in 67, maybe 2,000 Jewish believers on the whole planet, to 900,000 in the United States alone, and I think if you look at all Europe and Israel, we're talking about 1 million Jewish followers of Jesus today compared to 2,052 years ago. My friends, the veil is lifting. Our hearts, that partial hardening is coming off. This is the most extraordinary evidence of the responsiveness of Jewish people to the gospel ever in human history, including the first century. Okay? Now, we're not done, right? We're not done by a long shot. In a world of somewhere between 15 and 17 million Jewish people, 1 million ain't enough. It isn't Romans 11:26 yet, where all Israel has gotten saved. But that's where we're heading. Okay? Now, you should be investing in Jewish evangelism and ministry even if nobody's responding. Okay? But when you see spikes like this, you should be doubling down. This is when you really should be investing. Our ministry, the Joshua Fund, we consider ourselves, we're venture capitalists. We're investing in ministries in Israel, in the Palestinian disputed territories, and in 5 neighboring Arab countries. We're investing like venture capitalists in small ministries, gospel-driven ministries that don't have the resources to make the level of impact they could be making. And if God lets us, we invest prayerfully and financially. And we invest heavily in what CPM is doing. And I've worked doing conferences and fundraisers for CPM for years because I believe in what they're doing, that they're at the forefront of an entire movement of the most important gospel work being done among our people in all of human history. And even if there wasn't response, it would still be important. But when you see response like this, then you should be investing even more. Let me close this out so you understand where I'm going. If you took Jewish evangelism as a stock, right? And you started in the first century and you saw a little blip, and then you basically saw a flat line. Now, according to Mitch's research, pre-Holocaust, you would have seen those numbers spiking a little bit. It went up to 230,000 Jewish followers of Jesus prior to the Holocaust. Mostly this was Europe. Why? Because the church was very focused and intentional on sharing the gospel with Jewish people in Europe, also the United States, but mostly Europe. That was the center of Judaism at the time. The church was very intentional and focused, and Jews were going through horrific times, the pogroms and other attacks, and they were listening. But the Holocaust wiped out the vast majority of the Jewish believing community. And so we started from almost nobody post-Holocaust, and now we're at approximately 1 million. So again, if you had this stock chart and you're looking at the 2,000-year chart, you click on CNBC and you say JewishEvangelism.com, and that's a joke, but I mean that isn't such an organization. But if you were doing this and you basically see a flat line, like, why should I invest in that stock? There's no growth. And if you did it over 2,000 years. But if you zeroed in on the 50-year chart or the 20-year chart or the 10-year chart, you'd see this incredible spike. Moreover, that's of a response. That's of saying yes to Jesus. But then when you look at the evangelistic videos that of I Met Messiah, my father's done one, I've done one, you've seen them. This is what Mitch and One for Israel are doing together. You are seeing tens of millions of views. This is we're listening. We're curious. We want to understand why you're making the case as Jewish people that Jesus is the Messiah that came for us. My friends, these spikes should be, if you're an investor, if that's your heart to invest in the gospel, when you see spikes like this, that's where you want to be investing. I love this ministry. I love their heart. I love their consistency. And I do believe that Chosen People Ministries is the foremost Jewish missions ministry on the entire planet. And I believe that it's worth your investment, a significant investment. And I would say I don't know how much time we have left till the Lord takes us. I believe he's going to come and get us soon. I don't know how much time there is. I'm not one of those guys who will try to guess. I just know that from my own personal life, certainly for the Joshua Fund, which is a significant investor in Chosen People Ministries, my life, my time, my talent, my treasures, I want to have invested faithfully, wisely. And I want to see Jesus one day and have him say to me, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." And I hope that you will take a moment tonight. We're going to give you an opportunity right now. Rich Freeman, who's the vice president of Chosen People Ministries, is going to come up and walk you through the actual form. But I would like you to take a moment right now and make a decision between you and the Lord of how you're going to invest in this ministry at this critical time. Again, they're trying to raise $1.125 million above and beyond the money they use for normal operations to accelerate the gospel ministry opportunities in 2019. And I hope and I pray that you'll be part of it. Rich, would you come up and explain exactly how they can invest? God bless you guys.